I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Zeekr X. What makes the Zeekr interesting, firstly, is its provenance. It definitely is a case of another month, another brand, but in this case, the Zeekr shares significant amounts of its DNA with the Volvo X30 because all those brands are owned by Geely. So in China, this is essentially an upmarket brand for Geely. In Australia, Zeekr arrives here first, and Geely will be coming here in a couple of months' time. So that will be yet another Chinese EV brand here. But there is something interesting about the Zeekr, and that it is mainly designed in Gothenburg in Sweden by ex-Volvo Polestar designers. And even though it is made in China with its siblings, it is trying to bridge the gap between Chinese EV excellence and having a bit of European flair. Where does the name come from, you might ask? Well, according to Wikipedia, it is a combination of Generation Z and geek, because geeks love EVs, apparently, and yet this one's called X, so it's also for Generation X as well. So theoretically, half of me should love this car, and the other half should be completely baffled by all of its electronics and its controls. But as we shall discover, that is not the case with the Zeekr X. Styling-wise, the Zeekr X is quite distinctive. It is a very unique looking vehicle, and even though under the skin it is identical to an X30 except for having a 100mm longer wheelbase, to its great benefit, mind you, the rest of it is meant to be very design-led, almost like a Louis Vuitton bag on wheels. Now, there are only 6 colours, and most of them aren't really a colour, but it does come in a really cool green. This one here is grid grey, there's a mist grey, there's a pearl white, and a Palace beige. And so if you're thinking, you know, tealy green, Palace beige, these sort of colours, you'll understand why it is coloured and designed the way it is on the inside. It has a very clear and distinct aesthetic, and I think that actually plays well for the Zeekr X itself. Drivetrain-wise, identical to the X30. So we've got a rear drive, 200 kilowatt, 343 Newton meter base model. That starts at $56,900 in Australia. This one here is the all drive, dual motor, 315 kilowatts, 543 Newton meters, $64,900. And while you might question those prices given that you've never heard of the brand, once we go through the Zeekr X, you'll see that its depth of premium, certainly in its design and finishes, is really quite tangible, and it makes those prices actually look quite respectable.
Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Where the Zeekr fulfills its promise of being premium is in the details. And if you have the key fob and this other little card thing in your pocket and you approach the car, it welcomes you with a little song, it plays this little lighting show at the front, and it drops in their door handles like this. So you just grab them and pulse and they just open effortlessly. You don't need to push any buttons. And not only does the car say hello with its little light show and its little musical arrangement, it also has this little AI dude appear in the B pillar here that winks at you, and then it says hi, which is kind of cute. When you're charging, it also shows you what the charging is with the car. So this sort of non-touchscreen B pillar here that's actually functional rather than just blacked out is kind of useful and very unique. Again, a cool little premium detail that isn't too gimmicky, although it is still a bit gimmicky. But then Zeekr is for geeks, right? And they might love this, assuming I'm not a geek. Size-wise, the Zeekr X is a small SUV. It's only 4.4 metres long, despite being on a 2750mm wheelbase. This one here is the all-drive, so it has forged 20-inch alloys. It does have some quite cool design elements. These sort of swage lines in the doors, the way it fades up into the back here, and it has this flush panel here. If you look at it from certain angles, certainly from towards the front three-quarter, it does look a little bit like an egg through here. I kind of like it. It's a bit different. This kick-up line in the rear doors is a bit Datsun 180B. I kind of like that too, although it does make it a little bit difficult to look over your shoulder inside the car. And at the back, it's all a little bit truncated, slightly Renault Megane 2-esque, especially from this angle looking at it here. And again, it has its own little light show, a little 3D Zeekr badge. Again, it's about making it look different, and that it absolutely achieves that. At the back here, we have this lighting display in the rear lights. You can have cool or fun or reduced. I've had it on fun because it's kind of fun. It does have sequential rear blinkers. All this looks kind of cool The electric tailgate is just a simple little button there, which is probably the easiest electric tailgate action I've ever seen. Has these enormous struts here, which says it should keep working for quite some time. And inside the boot here, 362 litres, which is entirely doable for a small SUV. 1,100 and something with the seats folded virtually flat, 60-40 split. A bit of stuff under the floor here, of which is a warning triangle. It does have a frunk, but the frunk is filled with cords. In its own little package, it does fit perfectly, but it's really not for anything else other than the charging stuff. So getting in, you just grab underneath the door handle and it just automatically pulses open. The frameless doors just drop a little bit to make it work a bit better. And here on the sill, we have this little fillet that says Zeekr, designed in Gothenburg, Sweden, to remind you that it's not just Chinese, it's more international than you think. This all-drive version here does have one option, and that is a $500 colour package. And that changes the dash top from being charcoal black and these trim inserts and all the seats from being stone grey to either midnight blue and polar white, which is what we have here. All of this sort of dark blue here, all across the dash top, all of the floor, all of the carpet, and the seatbelts, as we can see here. Or you can have it in mulberry and rose, which really does seem quite Chinese to me. The mulberry being maroon on the top and all of this being a really deep cream. I do prefer the blue and the white over the mulberry and rose, but then I also like the fact that they're not all black or grey. There's a bit of bravery about it. And both of those colour options bring this microfiber roof lining, which just feels like patting a soft cat. It's actually really, really nice, and it's all over the sun visors as well. And these little details, these little quality bits and pieces permeate the entire cabin. Even the wheel boss here is plastic, but it looks like suede. It has this texture on it that makes it look like a material. We've got a two-tone leather wheel, squared off in a squircle, very similar to an EX30, so it could be the same one, but that doesn't really matter. The rest of the interior here has what is a $4,000 convenience pack on the rear drive is standard in this all-drive version. So you get things like 6-way electric front passenger seat, heating and cooling for both front seats, heated steering wheel, and a 13-speaker Yamaha stereo, which is actually really good among a bunch of other little things. The all-drive does exclusively get a 24.6-inch augmented reality head-up display, which really doesn't show everything it can do because I'm not using the embedded sat-nav in the car. And it does get the intelligent B-pillar display that we saw we were getting in the car. As for the rest of the ergonomics, it's all fairly minimalized. This 14.6-inch landscape screen here controls most of the stuff, but it actually is really easy to use and really quite intuitive once you've worked out what the symbols mean and all that stuff. You've even got the weather running here all the time, Apple CarPlay, just a symbol down here, the seats, seating and cooling straight away, just push it again to go away, all derived from the way Volvo does screens, and even better, the way Polestar does screens. The Zeekr benefits from that. That is where this Chinese EV is significantly better than any of its other rivals, because it has that less is more logic about it. Where that is illogical is on the steering wheel. It has no controls whatsoever. This one here is for the volume, and I know that because I've used it, and this one here is for the cruise control, and it's really just a stab in the dark. You engage it by pushing down like that on the column there, like you do when you engage drive, but then I don't really know how to turn it off other than stabbing the brake. It's probably in the manual, but I've read that and it wasn't in there. So the other thing that the Zeekr does where it starts to betray its origins, I think, is some of the safety stuff. It isn't necessarily intrusive in the way that it operates, but it is intrusive in the way that it beeps and the things that it says. You could be looking straight ahead and it beeps and says, distractive, drive carefully. That's its English. Distractive, drive carefully, even though you're not distracted and you're looking straight ahead. If you take any corner at any sort of speed, it says engaged emergency video here and beeps and starts filming your driving, thinking you're going to have an accident when you're actually just going around a corner and are not even very quickly, which is probably not going to be a great thing in the European market. The rest of the car is all fairly simple. The packaging and that is quite good. I can fit this full camping bottle standing upright in the driver's door, which is highly unusual. And while there are some things about the design of the car, in particular these power window things that are just these little metal kind of concept car-esque switches, They do take a bit of getting used to as to which way you push them. It all tends to work pretty well. In the center here, we have a 50-watt wireless charger. You can lift that up to access this tray down here. That's got this little concertina cover and a cup holder here that you can flip over like that. You can take that out. It's got a little panel here that you can put stuff behind. If you have a small purse, you can hang that from there. A 27-watt charger here, a 60-watt USB-C charger there, but no glove box. So there isn't really a heap of storage, but what it has is kind of quirkily useful. In here, it has another panel in here, and there's a button here that says remove module. You can take this whole back end of the console out and theoretically use it at a barbecue for what, I don't know, other than maybe a seat. But in its place, you can accessorize an ice box that can also be a warmer and a cooler with the lid flipping up that way and have drinks or things that you want to keep warm in the center console here. And to the ambient lighting, which is the thing that the all-wheel drive also brings. They call it ice block design. It runs all the way through the dash here, and it also has this cityscape skyline here in the doors, which you can see when you're sitting on the opposite side of the car. And all of that is kind of probably the most gimmicky thing in the interior, in particular when you get it to play music. So it has a kind of a dynamic beat with the music you're playing. However, it doesn't actually know how to dance, because when the beat is there, it's not moving to the beat. It's moving to its own beat, which is slightly unusual. The last thing I'll say about the Zeekr X's controls is that it hasn't embedded everything into screens. It does have a physical gear selector on the right here with drive and the cruise control, like we mentioned. And on this side, we have all the wipers and all that sort of stuff, and the windscreen washers. All of that is total logic to me. Probably not quite as much is the door release, which is this sort of rose gold button here, which you press there, and it's sort of, there's a little bit awkward to use in the front. I think they work in the back better, but I do kind of like that. And there is one Easter egg, and I don't know what it means, but it is a sperm whale just down there in the bottom right of the dash. My favorite type of whale, frolicking there in some kind of waterish environment. Maybe it's because the windscreen can get rain on it, and there's a whale there. I don't know. Let us know if you know. The rear seat of the Zeekr X is significantly more expansive than an EX30's. It seems like every centimetre of that 10 centimetre wheelbase stretch is all in here, and perhaps even then some, because I've got all this knee room here. That seat is all the way down and my toes are wedged under it a bit, but they're not too bad. It's nice and soft. All of these finishes in here are lovely. The doors are just the same as the fronts, nice and soft, nice soft door armrests. Much more logical door release here in the back being in the middle, although in both cases, if they do stop working, there are manual releases hidden underneath there, so you're not going to be stuck in the car. I love all the microfleece still around the B-pillar and all through the back. That sort of rain droplet diamond patterning that's across the dash. It does look like little drops of rain again on the backs of the front seats here. More rose gold, asymmetric matte pocket seams, just little bits of detail everywhere. Even weirdly, and this may be a right thing, this coconut water fits in here diagonally into the back door. So there has been a lot of design designed in to the Zeekr X. It is perhaps even over-designed in some people's opinions. Maybe the hotel carpet floor mats are a bit too much for some, but I instantly was like, oh wow, it looks like a hotel. And that has to be a good thing, I think. It does have B-pillar air vents down here, but their airflow is so insipid. It's just like an ant breathing. It's barely anything, although it is better than nothing. And while this back seat is nowhere near as enveloping and excellent as the six-way electric front seats, again, it's still a lot better than an X30, more reclined in the backrest, just generally pretty comfortable. Not a ton of under-thigh support, but all pretty good. And with this glass roof, which, mind you, I should say, has a degree of tinting embedded into it that makes it not too unbearable. What the Zeekr X doesn't have is much window tinting on the side glass. There's no rear privacy glass here. There's no band tin in the top of the front screen. So when it's on a really glary day like today, you really feel it inside this car. It is glare. Anyone who has four eyes like me needs to wear their sunglasses. As for the rest of the seat, you can sit someone in the center here. It's not amazing, but the floor is mostly flat. This is pretty good. I do like the little Zeekr branded pull on the armrest in the middle here. All of this is still really nice. This is not leather, mind you. This is leather look upholstery, but it is soft to touch, especially the perforated bits. All of that makes it feel like it's premium, which is, again, the whole point of this vehicle, from the moment you set off behind the wheel of the Zeekr X all-wheel drive, two things really hit home. The first is its vision, certainly in front and to the side ahead of the B-pillar, which is outstanding. And the second is its drivetrain response, which is really smooth. It doesn't have that neck snapping response that is uncomfortable for everybody, including the driver. And even though it doesn't have that abruptness of the regenerative braking that, say, a Hyundai or a Kia would have with their iPedal mode engaged, it still does a really nice job of bringing itself mostly to a stop. It'll hold itself there if you have the auto hold mode activated, and it just has a nice seamlessness to it, as well as the refinement, because it's an electric car and it doesn't have synthesized sounds over it other than the music that it plays when you get in and when you say goodbye. The rest of the driving experience is not quite to the same standard. The steering, at least, is a long way there. It is nice and measured. I've left it in sport, not in normal or in light, because I feel like sport, in this case, is actually not too heavy. It gives it a nice amount of weighting. It feels pretty good from behind the wheel. It does mask a little bit of that numbness at straight ahead with the fact that it has the weighting. And as you turn in, once you get past or approach a quarter of a turn of lock and then further, it really engages the chassis. It really does turn in well. You can feel the back end start to be involved in terms of its balance, and it has a level of poise and dynamism that is probably a little bit unexpected, actually, because it doesn't really shout at you that I want to be driven or that I love driving. It just is incidental that it does the handling stuff. Loaded up in the middle of a corner, it isn't as sharp as an EX30. It doesn't have that incisiveness that the Volvo dual motor has, but at the same time, I think that benefits it for most of the time, this degree of comfort. What it doesn't have, though, is just the plush kind of ride quality that a car with this kind of finish and this sort of level of comfort and mostly refinement deserves. It sort of reacts off bumps, it deflects off bumps here and there, it thumps through in the suspension sometimes, it really thumps through in the back end if you're sitting in the back. It doesn't have the polish there that the rest of the car implies that it might have, or that it indeed would be really well served by having. And so it's kind of another case of, why is this another EV that doesn't ride properly? It does have 20-inch wheels, sure, but they're 45 series. Those Continental tyres are not entirely performance suited, but at the same time, they're not super slim in their sidewall either. And the wheels are forged, so they should be nice and light, and yet it still feels kind of heavy on the road. On coarsely surfaced and really challenging roads, i.e. country Australian roads, it moves around a lot in its suspension. If those bumps are intruding in a corner, it sort of starts to kind of gyrate a bit. It isn't bad, but it is perverse fun even, but it isn't really composed. It does feel unsettled. You can hear all the door windows, the frameless glass moving and all the rubbers from all four doors in the car, and there is quite an amount of suspension noise. So that sort of stuff, it still needs work. While something like an Ioniq 5, at least prior to its most recent update, it wasn't sorted in right either. It had a great amount of balance, a really great chassis, and a really nice steering feel and communication. And the Zeekr is a little bit more aloof at that sort of stuff. It has it there, but you need to find it. But that's not really what it's about. Perhaps as an indication of the fact that it isn't really a driver's car, even though potentially it sort of implies that it might be, are those driver warnings. The distractive drive carefully, the fact that it starts filming you the moment you take a corner with any kind of enthusiasm, just even making the calls about speed limit. If you don't turn the speed limit assist off, it will call every single school zone as a speeding moment. It doesn't recognize time, it just sees the sign on the road. It's all a little bit amateur. And so while the lane keep assist and most of that stuff actually does work pretty good, even the adaptive cruise is pretty good. It lets you go reasonably close to a car compared to some other systems like Toyota, say. In the Zeekr, when you're just driving along normally, it'll flash at you and beep at you and say, keep a safe distance behind the car in front, even though you are what I would deem a safe distance behind the car in front. So once again, it's the safety stuff that kind of gets in the way. All that safety stuff is relatively easy to turn off, but the thing is, in a premium, well-engineered car, you don't normally need to turn that stuff off. It is usually well calibrated and a complement to the way that you drive, rather than an impediment to the way that you drive. And in the Zeekr X, just at those moments where you need all of your concentration and focus is when it starts beeping at you and flashing at you, telling you that something's wrong or telling you that you're doing something wrong. You might be the greatest driver in the world, driving the best you have ever driven, and yet the calibration of these systems, once again, seems to be set up for someone who's driving for the very first time on their L plates, and everyone else has to suffer as a consequence, which is a shame. As for the ownership stuff, the Zeekr's warranty is 5 years or unlimited kilometres, but I kind of was hoping that it would be 7 because the brand doesn't have a track record in Australia. The service intervals are every 2 years or 40,000 kilometres, which is actually really good. Don't know what the cost is, but that interval is excellent. Zeekr in Australia does not quote WLTP range for either a Zeekr X model, but online you'll find that it says around 400 kilometres for the all drive, 440 for the rear drive, whereas the ADR numbers is 540 and 470, and you're not going to achieve those. Based on our efficiency that we've had in here, averaging 19.1 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres total, that calculates out at about 335, but that has included quite a bit of freeway driving. Based on the number we were getting solely from driving it around town, it works out at about 410. So if you were driving your Zeekr X mostly in the city, which I presume most people would, you might be able to match that 400 kilometre WLTP number. Otherwise, you'll be charging quite a bit, and you'll be waiting 30 minutes to do it from 10 to 80% at 150 kilowatts DC, which is pretty competitive, but still not 18 minutes like in a Hyundai Ioniq 5. While it's a little bit difficult to completely pin down the essence of the driving personality of a Zeekr X, in terms of its design, its distinctiveness, and even the premium feel of its interior, especially with the fact that it doesn't actually have a bit of a pong about it. It feels premium because it doesn't have a cheap smell. This is a car that has had money expended to achieve its design and to build it. And so all of that for some people is going to really, really hit home for the Zeekr X. This all drive version here at around $70,000 drive away might seem a little bit expensive for a brand that you've never heard of, but once you start to pick through it and look at it, especially compared to something like the Toyota, Subaru, Tesla, EV opposition, tons of EV opposition to be honest, the Zeekr X has a point of difference. I just wish the damping was better. I wish it was a bit more attuned to driving on Australian roads, but it does have a tangible sense of polish about it, and it's relatively well finessed to the point where the people who might consider buying a Zeekr X actually probably will really love the stuff that it brings, certainly in the interior. Let us know what you think. Would you consider a Zeekr X based on the fact that its engineering is the same as a Volvo EX30? Would you consider Zeekr as a brand altogether? What do you think about this plethora of Chinese EVs coming? And what do you think about chasing cars? Please let us know. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video and hit the notification bell.